let me go down here and come back to where we were. So remember, the problem of injustice is that the utilitarian has a hard time explaining why injustice is wrong, and that's a problem for the theory. They could make the they could sort of alter the view somewhat and claim that justice is also something that has intrinsic value, but that seems to go against the core principle, which is that welfare, utility, is what has intrinsic value. The utilitarian could also deny that injustice is ever optimific, right? That there's ever a context in which injustice would promote the best outcome. Right? That's an argument the utilitarian could make, but it seems false. It seems like there are situations in which doing some small injustice over here will promote the best overall outcome in the future. Okay, so that's not a very promising way of solving the problem. Third, the utilitarian could just bite the bullet and say that sometimes we have to sacrifice justice for the sake of utility. And we just have to acknowledge that utility is of primary importance, of primary value. And that most of the time, doing justice, acting justly, avoiding injustice, most of the time promotes more happiness for more people, promotes more utility. But there are occasions in which injustice is permitted. There are cases where we have to sacrifice justice for the sake of the general welfare of the people. Okay, and that's one way of solving the problem, but many people would argue that's a weakness of the theory. We shouldn't ever have to sacrifice justice for the sake of utility, right? We should find a way to balance them. Okay, or something along these lines. So this motivates the Kantian project. There's a picture of Kant and his book, Groundwork of the Metaphysics of Morals, which we'll read after we get back from break, chapters from that. He's a German philosopher, 18th century, very influenced by the events of the French Revolution and later by the events of the American Revolution. He was all about freedom and the autonomy of persons, the dignity that free beings have. They deserve a certain kind of respect, and the respect they deserve really boils down to the idea that we should never make an exception of ourselves, right, and treat others as mere means to our ends. That's Kant's way of putting it. You could also put it this way: we should never violate another person's rights for the sake of our own good. We should always treat people with a sense of justice. That is to say, we should never treat another person unjustly, right? We never get to do an injustice, right? We should never sacrifice justice for the sake of some other good that we're trying to promote. Okay, that's Kant's basic view, and he defends it in the Groundwork of the Metaphysics of Morals. I'm going to move a little more quickly through chapter 11, but this is the second part here of the slideshow, Fairness and Justice, the Kantian perspective. And Schaefer-Landau begins motivating the Kantian view by proposing a couple of popular tests of morality. One is, when you're trying to figure out, well, is this something I should do or not? Well, what if everyone did that? That gets close to an idea about consistency and fairness that Kant is focusing on, although it's a different kind of question than the one Kant is asking, and it leads to a different kind of conclusion. It's a version of what's called rule consequentialism, right, is what that question leads to. Right? What if everyone acted on the rule that I'm acting on right now? Would it promote better or worse consequences? That's sort of what that question is asking. And that is an expression of a concern for consistency and fairness in our actions. We want to make sure that we're acting on rules, right, that we would want everybody to act on. But that's not quite the question or not quite the test of morality that Kant intends, although it comes close. Many religious and cultural traditions and have some version of the golden rule built into their systems of morality, or built into their ideas about the moral life or the good life. Right, the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would want to have done unto you. Right, that's how it comes out of the biblical context. Right, but we see versions of the golden rule in other cultures, not just in the Judeo-Christian tradition. And so a way of formulating this question or this test of morality is, how would you like it if I did that to you? And this again expresses our concern for consistency and fairness, right? morality has to do with consistency and fairness, right? So I'm trying to figure out whether I'm doing the right thing or not. Well, how would I like it if, how would you like it if I did that to you, right? Or how would you like it if I did that to you, right? It's the same question, right? We want to do the thing that another person would want to be treated that way, or I shouldn't do something that to someone that I wouldn't want to have done to me, right? Okay, but again, Kant doesn't think that quite gets at the test of morality, or it's not quite the question that we should be asking when we're concerned with consistency and fairness, partly because, as Schaefer-Landau points out, the golden rule seems to depend on what we desire. So he gives an example of this, and in a way that's problematic. At the bottom of 169, suppose somebody likes being hit. Suppose someone takes pleasure in getting hit. Well, then, if I'm asking, do I get to hit you, right? And I ask, well, how would I like it if you did that to me? Well, I'd like it just fine. So I guess I get to do it to you, right? Most people don't have the desire to be hit, but the point is the golden rule doesn't explain what's wrong with hitting someone if you desire to be hit. So that's a sort of simple example that Schaefer-Landau gives. Similarly, the fanatic, he gives the example of the fanatic who seems willing to suffer a lot for the sake of some cause that he believes in, right? So he gives examples of extreme sort of right-wing Nazi sympathizers, right? Who subjected Jews and gypsies and other groups to horrible suffering for the sake of, the purity of the German people, right? Well, the golden rule doesn't really capture what's wrong with that action, because the extreme fanatic is willing to suffer for the sake of what he believes in. And so, if he's asking, how would you like it if I did that to you? Well, he would be okay with suffering, right? Because he thinks it's worth suffering for some things, okay? So the golden rule doesn't capture what's wrong with the fanatic. It doesn't capture what's wrong with the person who desires, things like pain and getting hit. It doesn't explain what's wrong with those actions. Okay, so Kant proposes a different test of morality, a different principle, a different question to determine whether you are acting morally or not, right? The question is, am I making an exception of myself? Or am I acting on a policy that I could make a policy for everyone? If the answer is, if the answer to the first question is yes, I'm making an exception of myself, then I'm treating myself as somehow special, as somehow having greater value than you. And I'm thinking that I get to act according to my own rules, where you have to play according to a different set of rules. And whenever I do that, Kant thinks, I know deep down that I'm doing something wrong. Or the second question, am I acting on a policy that I could make a policy for everyone? Well, it's a similar question, right? Am I trying to make a rule that just applies to me? Or am I trying to make an exception to a rule that just applies to me? Right? What if everyone made this exception? Or what if everyone acted on this policy, right? If it's not a policy or an exception that I could make for everyone, then I shouldn't make it for myself. Right? That's the Kantian view. And for Kant, this expresses most clearly our concern for consistency and fairness, which is the core of of the moral law, the core of morality. Morality is about consistency and fairness, according to Kant. So here's his supreme principle of morality: an act is morally acceptable if and only if its maxim is universalizable. Maxim is a word for the policy on which I act. I have to ask myself every time I act, right? What is my maxim? What is my policy? And is it one that I could make a policy for everyone? Is it one that I could universalize, make a law to everyone? If not, then I don't get to act on it myself. I have to act on a different maxim if it's not one that I could universalize. So that's sort of Kant's supreme principle. That's what makes our actions moral. That's what gives them their moral value, that we are acting on maxims that we can universalize, right? It has to do with the intention, the policy, the principle on which we act, not the results of the action. So here's a challenge. And I don't have time to get through the whole of this slideshow, but we can talk about it more next week. Here's a challenge to any moralist, right? Why be moral, right? What reason do I have to be moral? Now, Kant introduces a distinction between two types of imperatives, two types of should statements, right? A hypothetical imperative is a should statement that is conditional. It's conditional on something that you desire. So you should study for the exam on the condition that you desire an A, right? So given that I desire an A, right, the imperative statement, you should study for the exam, applies to me. It gives me a reason to study because I desire an A. But notice that it's hypothetical, it's conditional on the desire. If I don't desire the A, then it's not true that I should study for the exam. Right? So most imperatives, most should statements only apply to us conditionally or hypothetically on the condition that we have certain desires or projects that we're working on. A categorical imperative gives me a reason to act independently of my desires without reference to any of pet projects of mine or without reference to my interests and desires and plans. It just says you should do this or you shouldn't do that. But it's not conditional on desires that I have. So you should tell the truth. Not on the condition that you want to make friends or you want to be popular or you want to get ahead in life, but just on the condition that, right, you are a rational being. Like, there are no conditions, right? Unconditionally. A categorical imperative is a should statement that applies to you unconditionally. So Kant's trying to defend the view that morality speaks to us that way. It gives us reasons to do things independently of what we happen to desire. Okay? And based on that distinction, he's going to make an argument for the irrationality of morality. From Kant's point of view, it's irrational to be immoral. I have a reason to be moral in the sense that it would be irrational for me to do otherwise, right? And so, but here's the amoralist challenge that he's responding to. Okay, in brief, and this comes from page 174. People have a reason to do something only if doing it will get them what they want, right? This is the amoralist, the one who's saying that we don't have a reason to be moral, or at least it's rational to be immoral. So that's the first premise. People have a reason to do something only if doing it will get them what they want, what they care about. Sorry, will get them what they care about. Doing their moral duty sometimes fails to get people what they care about. Therefore, this is the mini conclusion, people sometimes lack any reason to do their moral duty. But if people lack any reason to do their moral duty, then violating their moral duty can be perfectly rational. Therefore, this is the final conclusion, it can be perfectly rational for people to violate their moral duty. This is a challenge to any moral theory, and Kant has a reply to it. Right? He's trying to show that the amoralist is wrong, that the conclusion, we can reject the conclusion, that it's not perfectly rational for people to violate their moral duty. It involves a form of irrationality. Okay? But look, think about the argument, right? Is it a good argument? How might you reply? Which premises can you object to? On what grounds would you object to this argument? Okay, think about that on your own. And here's a way of thinking about it. Can we really opt out of morality and refuse to play that game? Think of it as a kind of game with a set of rules, the rules of morality, right? We can opt out of certain kinds of games, like baseball. I can opt out of the rules of baseball by refusing to play the game, right? So if I decide I'm not playing baseball, I can, run from first base to home without touching second and third because I'm not even trying to play baseball. The rules don't apply to me anymore. If I commit to playing the game, then I have to touch second and third before I touch home, right? Or otherwise I've broken the rules, right? Well, what about morality? Is it like baseball? Can I just refuse to play that game and say, look, you guys are going to play the game of morality, but I'm going to play a different game? Is that rational, right? That's the psychopath, essentially. This is the one who does not acknowledge that the existence of other people, does not acknowledge that we have any responsibilities to others. Is that a perfectly rational way to live? Or is it somehow deeply irrational? That's Kant's question, okay? We're running out of time here. But here's Kant's reply. So think about whether you accept Kant's reply to the amoralist challenge. This is something we can talk about when we return from the break, okay? I'm gonna end the video here. And again, we can pick up on, there's some other slides here that we can talk about at the end, next week. The principle of universalizability that he defends, the value of integrity, right, or the virtue of integrity. For Kant, morality is all about integrity, whereas for the utilitarian, it's all about benevolence. And then the question of whether our moral duties are absolute or not. For Kant, all moral duties are absolute, right? And so think about the case of lying, right? Can we ever justify the lie or not? There's Pinocchio. Okay. This is an image